Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at something that affects pretty much all of us, cybersecurity.
Yeah, it's one of those things that kind of sneaks up on you, and all of a sudden, it's
Yeah,
like front page news.
exactly. We saw it earlier this year with a couple of big high-profile security breaches.
Hmm.
We're talking about Move It and Go Anywhere MFT.
Right, those are big ones.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of people, those names might not, you know, immediately mean something, but the impact of these breaches was huge.
Absolutely, and I think that's what makes it so interesting
Yeah.
to talk
Yeah,
about.
because it really shows you how interconnected everything is, right? You
Exactly.
have these, kind of specialized software solutions
Mm-hmm.
that are designed for transferring data securely. And then, boom, they get hit.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, you have all these different companies and organizations,
Yeah.
even governments affected.
It really does kind of ripple outward, doesn't it?
Yeah. So let's start with Movie It. They were hit not once, not twice, but three
Right.
times by the same group, the Clop ransomware gang.
Yeah, they were busy.
And they used this thing called a SQL injection.
Yeah, SQL injection is kind of a classic, unfortunately.
So for someone like me who's, not a tech wizard,
Yeah.
what exactly is SQL injection?
So basically, it's a way for hackers to sneak in malicious code into a system. They find a vulnerability in a website
Right.
or a piece of software, and they inject this code that lets them bypass security measures and gain access to, all sorts of sensitive data.
So it's like a digital backdoor.
Exactly.
They're just slipping right in.
Slipping right in.
And in the case of Nova Sea, this affected a lot of companies.
Uh-huh.
We're talking Zellies, which is a big payroll company.
Right.
The government of Nova Scotia, British Airways, BBC, even Boots, the pharmacy chain. I mean, the list goes on.
And that's what's so striking about these attacks, right? It's not just one company
Yeah.
or one industry.
It's like a domino effect.
Yeah, it's a domino effect.
And I think what really stood out to me was that a lot of these victims were handling really sensitive personal data.
You're right. And it makes you think about the motivation behind these attacks, like why target these specific organizations.
Right.
And I think in the case of the Klopp Group, they're after high-value data. They know that organizations that hold personal information are more likely to pay a ransom to avoid, a bigger PR nightmare or legal issues.
Yeah, it's scary to think about, your personal information
Yeah.
being out there in the hands of these criminals.
Absolutely.
And then, we have the Go Anywhere MFT breach, and that involved a different kind of vulnerability, right?
Right. This one was a bit more technical. It was a specific vulnerability that had a code, a CVE number.
Yeah, I saw that. It was CVE 2023-0669.
Right. And what that essentially means is that there was a flaw in the software that allowed for what we call remote code execution.
Okay, and for those of us who, aren't fluent in cybersecurity jargon, break that down for us. What is that?
So imagine giving someone a remote control to your computer. That's essentially what remote code execution allows hackers to do.
Oh, wow.
They can, run their own code on the affected system, which means they can steal data, manipulate files, even take control of the entire system. It's a pretty big deal.
So it's basically like leaving your front door wide open and hoping that no one walks in and steals your stuff.
Yeah, pretty much.
Not a good security strategy.
No, not at all.
And over 130 organizations were affected by this.
Right, including some big names like Rubrik, Hitachi Energy, Crown Resorts, the UK Pension Protection Fund.
And it's interesting to me, right? Because both Movi and Go Anywhere, they're designed specifically for secure data transfer.
It is a bit ironic, isn't it?
Yeah, like that's their whole purpose.
Yeah.
And yet they both suffered these major security breaches.
And I think it highlights a really important point, No software is perfect. There will always be vulnerabilities. And the key is to minimize those risks as much as possible.
Okay, so that brings us to the million-dollar question. How do we choose the right software vendor? Especially for something as crucial as data transfer.
That's a great question, and it's something that everyone should be thinking about.
And you mentioned earlier this idea of best-in-class software vendors.
Right.
So what sets them apart?
So best-in-class vendors are the ones who are really proactive about security. They invest in research and development. They have top-notch cybersecurity professionals on their team. They're constantly monitoring for threats. They're using advanced threat intelligence.
And I think a lot of people, they hear that phrase, threat intelligence, and they're like, Okay, what does that even mean?
Right. It sounds a bit like a buzzword,
Yeah.
but it's basically like having a super smart security system
Mm.
that's constantly learning and adapting. It's using data and analytics to predict and prevent attacks.
So they're not just reacting to breaches, they're actually trying to stay ahead of the curve.
Exactly, and that's key because the threat landscape is constantly evolving. Hackers are always coming up with new ways to exploit vulnerabilities.
So what you're saying is it's not just about having, the best software today. It's about choosing a vendor
Yeah.
that's committed to staying ahead of those threats,
Right.
committed to constant improvement.
Exactly. And a big part of that is how they respond to vulnerabilities.
Okay.
How quickly can they patch a security flaw once it's discovered?
Yeah, and we saw that with Moviet and Go Anywhere, right?
Yeah.
Like the response time was critical.
Absolutely. The faster they can patch the vulnerability, the less damage is done.
So listener, if you're out there and you're responsible for choosing software for your company, for your organization, don't just go for the cheapest option or the most well-known name.
Do your homework.
Really dig into their security practices, their history, their track record.
And don't be afraid to ask questions. Challenge them on their security measures. Make sure they're as committed to protecting your data as you are.
Yeah, you want a partner in this, right? Not just a vendor.
Absolutely. It's a partnership.
So, we've talked about preventing breaches, but what happens if, despite all our best efforts,
Yeah.
the worst happens and we do get hit?
That's where having an incident response plan comes in.
Okay, tell me more about that.
So an incident response plan is basically a roadmap for what to do if your organization experiences a security breach. It outlines the steps to take to contain the damage, investigate the incident, recover data, and notify the necessary parties.
So it's like a fire drill for your data.
Exactly. You don't wait for a fire to happen to figure out how to use a fire extinguisher.
Right.
You practice beforehand so that you're prepared.
So having that plan in place can really minimize the impact and
Sure.
help you get back on your feet faster.
Absolutely. It can make a huge difference in the outcome.
Okay, I'm starting to get it.
Yeah.
I think the big takeaway for me, and hopefully for our listeners today, is that cybersecurity is not just the IT department's problem.
Right.
It's everyone's responsibility.
Everyone's responsibility.
We need to be informed. We need to make smart choices about the software we use, and we need to be prepared for the unexpected.
And we need to keep learning. The threat landscape is always changing.
So stay curious, keep asking questions,
Yeah.
and don't just assume that
Yeah.
you're safe because you've never been hacked before.
Right. Because that's when they get you.
Exactly. Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive. I have learned a lot. Hopefully our listeners have too.
Me too. Always learning.
But, we've covered a lot of ground. And I think it's time to leave our listeners with a thought-provoking question.
Okay, I like it.
Something to really ponder. So, with the increasing sophistication of cyber attacks and the fact that, no system is truly impenetrable, what does the future of data security look like? What new technologies or strategies will we need to develop to stay ahead of the curve?
That's a great question.
And, how do we balance the need for security with the need for accessibility and convenience?
Right. Because
Right.
those are often at odds.
Yeah, so a lot to think about, listener. We hope you'll continue to explore these questions and join us again for another deep dive into the world of tech and its impact on our lives.
Always a pleasure.
Until next time.